How about that?
I don't know if you're bright enough. Hey! What's up, Facebook world? We're live. Yeah, we're good. Everybody's bright enough. Hey, it's Rachel Dawn, and this is hashtag Real Talk with Rachel Dawn, episode 11. I ran out of fingers. We're officially past the fingers. So, what's up? Welcome. We are excited to be live with you guys tonight. I'll kind of talk and introduce and let everybody get warmed up while people are logging on. When you pop on, if you would, please leave me a comment. Say hey, let us know that you're here. And also, we ask that you please share this video so that your friends can join the conversation. That would be awesome. So, appreciate that. Hey, Andrea, I just saw you log on. Welcome.
Are we getting what we need
hang
here?
on. Yeah. Please hold. It should pop up. Maybe not. I don't know. It should say like Rachel's live, but it's not. Let's see if it's live over here. We're going to try to police the comments so we can keep up with you guys. While we're live, it should pop up right here. So we'll go ahead and get started for tonight. If you saw the event page, just keep going down. The conversation for tonight is, I'm titling it, It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And so there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so if you click on that, it should pull it up and then you can police the comments. And I did mute it, but it's not muted. There we go. We're all set now. Thank you for your patience.
It's an adventure.
It is. It's always technology is always an adventure.
True that.
So, it's okay to not be okay. This is stressing me out. It's all over my space.
Got it.
So we're gonna talk. We're gonna have a conversation about mental health tonight. So the idea is, if you or anybody you know have struggled with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempt, anything like that, definitely, like I said, share this video. Invite them to be part of the conversation. Sharing it now would be awesome. But if you want to share afterwards, after we're done, that's cool too. But yeah, I think this is a really, it's going to be a really great night. It's going to be a great conversation for people to be a part of. So hello, Amanda. Hello, Julie. Thank you for saying hey. Appreciate you guys being on tonight. We're excited to have you. So before we get started, I want to introduce my friends. So you guys already know JD.
That's right.
He was on, was it 2 videos ago? Well, you were on with Justin
last
time too.
Last one.
Yeah, and so he's been around for a couple videos. We've had conversations. He told his story. If you missed it, it was episode 9.
7.
Was it that long ago?
Yeah, it was February.
Dang, yeah. So a long time ago. But go find that guy's mug.
Okay.
You'll see it in the video. If you want to hear more about his story, because you'll be able to tell a little bit of your story tonight.
A little bit.
We'll be talking about that. But and then my special guest that I'm very excited to have here is a first timer tonight. Is my friend Jen Osborn. And Jen, so you are a young adult fiction author.
I am.
And how many published books do you have?
4.
4 published books in the young adult fiction realm. But you have several more books in some various genres that are written, aren't out yet, kind of waiting on some things, some not finished.
Right.
Yeah, right?
Exactly.
The
Exactly.
world of an author.
Oh,
Yes.
it is so illustrious.
And she does some speaking as well. And so what's cool is I met JD. We met through Crossroads, through the Undivided group.
Correct.
That's how we met.
Yep.
And Crossroads is the church that we go to here in Cincinnati. And I actually met Jen through Crossroads as well, but a little bit of a different twist. So as I was going through kind of the publishing journey for my book, I joined this writers group within the Crossroads community. And Jen and another friend of hers, Carrie, were both really helpful, really instrumental and resourceful for me really going through the publishing process. And so that's how we connected, and we sat down and had coffee. And she told me her story, and I was like, what? And so I am very excited to share her with you tonight, to share her story with you tonight. But before we dive into that, I want to kind of go over like why are we talking about this topic, right? Like why are we having this discussion? Mm-hmm. And so obviously this is a really hot topic, a really hot button in culture right now. I think in the whole world, kind of everybody's having this conversation or talking about having this conversation. There have been some recent suicides and drug overdoses and things like that kind of in the spotlight in Hollywood. And that has really spurred this conversation. I think the conversation is good.
Yeah.
And so really, when all that happened, I kind of felt like, is this a conversation that I should be in? Because like, this isn't necessarily something that I have struggled with personally. And so should I jump in on this or should I not? Or like when and how is the best time to join this conversation? And but the biggest thing is, I just want to make sure that we are talking about it, because I feel like the more that we normalize it and the more people who are struggling with it do feel comfortable talking about it, then the more breakthroughs that they can have. And so I remember what it was like for me growing up in an environment where it was absolutely not okay to talk about things, right? Mm-hmm. So at my family, like a lot of families I know, you just didn't talk about your problems. Like when things happened, like you just swept everything underneath the rug and like we didn't talk about it, we didn't address it. Like that was just the family culture that I grew up in. And then also like having grown up in the church, like that was a very, kind of a big part of the environment was, hey, we all want to be perfect, and when we're not, we cover that up. Again, like sweeping these under the rug, trying to hide it because we didn't want anybody else to find out that maybe we weren't perfect. When all of us were walking around being imperfect, right? Yeah. But we're all trying to hide it from each other. Right. And so that was a big part. So I remember what that was like. And so for me, like this is kind of where my story comes into this, right? Like I remember when I went through my divorce, just really feeling the shame of that, feeling the guilt of that, wanting to hide that, wanting to cover that up, and really kind of the only experience that I have around this topic of mental health, of depression, of anxiety. And I told you guys, I was kind of going through, my talking points tonight with my husband Barry, and I was like, well, I don't really think, I haven't dealt with depression at all, but like, when I went through my divorce, like I didn't get out of bed, I wasn't eating, and I'm like, oh, like those kind of are hallmarks of depression. Like I guess that really was. I probably did deal with that just a hair, but like I never acknowledged that and I didn't feel like, oh, I'm depressed, or whatever. Like do we ever put a label on it? Like, do you even know when you're depressed? That's probably a whole other conversation we can have. But anyway, but the whole point that I want to say about that is, when I went through that, and if you've read my book, I talk about this in chapter 4, that I got to a place in that season where I was really overwhelmed with all these thoughts in my head, really negative thoughts about myself, about my situation, and essentially what they all boiled down to and what they all culminated to was this one overriding thought of, it's better for everybody else if I'm not around. And I just felt like I had screwed up my life so bad that it was irredeemable, that I had really blown it, that God couldn't use me anymore, that I was a bad apple, that I was a bad influence. And again, it was best for everybody else if I'm not around. And again, I tell the story in my book that thank God that He gave me this revelation one night in my car that was a lie, and I was able to dismiss that at that point. But like, I shudder to think what had happened if I had been able to stay with that thought, and if that thought had just germinated in my life for a longer period of time. Like, I feel like that is kind of a universal thought that people who have dealt with suicidal thoughts, suicidal tendencies, have dealt with. And my experience with that is a friend of mine about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, he tried to commit suicide, made an attempt on his life. Thankfully, he was saved. He was rushed to the hospital in time. But what he posted on his Facebook page that night was, in his goodbye to everyone letter, what he said, in essence, in one line, he actually did say, like, it's better for my friends and family, it's better for my daughter, my 3-year-old daughter, if I'm not around her. Like, her life will be better without me in it. And that's obviously not true, but that's a place that you get to, I feel like. And so again, I was thankfully saved from that thought playing out any further in my life, but I did have that thought marinating around in my mind at some point. So that is my experience around this whole topic. So I am not the expert tonight, and I'm probably not going to do much else talking. So what I want you to hear is Jen's story. Because when I met Jen, like I said, we sat down, she told me her story. Her story is absolutely crazy town. I can't wait for it to come out in totality. It's going to come out in book form one day.
It will.
It's going to be
It
awesome.
will.
I'm trying to push the timeline quicker than apparently her or God wanted
And
to
she
be.
was just looking for something to do.
I
We were
know.
talking about that, but
So, but here's, okay, so, and I want you to tell, the parts of your story that I want you to tell, obviously, but basically, I mean, just give us a synopsis of your story. You can kind of tell it. I want to stop talking. So growing up with your dad, your dad, it was crazy with your dad.
It was. Just kind of a little background. My mother and father had multiple marriages between them. So my mother had been married 7 times. My dad eventually ended up with 4. And the marriage between my mother and father produced 3 children, of which I was the youngest.
Okay.
And my father was paranoid schizophrenic, and it was unmedicated. So it was a lot of chaos for me growing up. And my birth mother walked away when I was 14 months of age and just left me with him. For whatever reason, she thought we'd be better off with him. She had her own issues that she was dealing with. So I had no memory of her at all. So my father had remarried when I was still a baby. So the woman that I thought was my mother was actually my stepmother.
Sure, yeah.
But growing up with my dad, it was a lot of chaos. It was being woken up in the middle of the night, hearing that angels had talked to my dad, and he had, he heard this message. Or one time he was missing for 3 hours and had ended up being in the barn, totally losing his mind. He had overdosed on some drugs, and so added that with the schizophrenia. Came back, said aliens were coming. So it was
funny.
Yeah, I get it though. I mean, it's one of those things like, wow. He was just always off kilter and really at war with everyone else because his schizophrenia made it so super hard for him to relate normally to people. And so he just had this unspoken war, sometimes spoken, with everybody around us. So, and people in our small town, I'm from a very small town, and they didn't categorize him as mentally ill. They categorized him as difficult. Oh, okay. He's just difficult. And so we kind of got lumped in with that. We were his kids, so we were just kind of the casualties of that unspoken war. So when I got to be about 9 years old, I met my birth mother for the first time. She showed up, introduced herself, said, "Hey, hey,
P.S.
Yeah, P.S. I'm your mom." And it was one of those moments for me as a kid where it altered the course of my identity. As far as, well, if that's not my mother inside and you're my mother, like, who am I? And then, of course, my dad and his wonderful schizophrenia was like, "Oh yeah, that is your birth mother, but she tried to kill you when you were little." Not necessarily true. She tried to kill you when you were little, and she's done all these really horrible bad things. The schizophrenia speaking, obviously. But I internalized that, and I thought, oh gosh, what does that make me? Because I want to love her, and I want to know who she is. But if she tried to kill me, what does that say about me? And so it was this crazy dilemma, because then I started looking at the woman that I did know as mom as not necessarily being my mom. So it just totally messed everything up.
Well, that's what, 9 years old? That's hard to process.
Yeah, it was
it's
crazy.
Like we're equipped at that age to deal with that kind of stuff.
And I didn't have someone sitting beside me going, "Oh, Jen, let's explore how you're feeling. Let's talk about it." Literally, it was
therapy came much later. For all of us.
Still in it. Oh,
Hashtag real talk. Throw that out there.
It was crazy, though. I mean, it was one of those things where I, for a long time didn't know how to process her coming back in. But it just made the isolation even more. Because it was like, okay, so I can't really deal with my dad. And I'm constantly living in fear of, like, what his next big event was going to be and, like, what the next tragedy was going to be.
So a lot of trauma, a lot of scarring.
Trauma.
So then when you're 15 your dad actually ends up being arrested, going through a big public trial in this tiny little town.
Yes.
Went to prison.
Did.
It was, and I had you refresh my memory on all that tonight. I didn't remember what all it was for either, but it was for being a sexual predator was what his crime was, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And a whole bunch of crazy, awful stuff with that. Awful stuff that he involved you, like made you complicit in. You know what I mean? Like made you be a part of it, like that. So craziness, like and I'm telling you, like the book, like it's gonna be great. It's gonna be a great story.
Gotta get it finished,
right? I mean, but it's nuts, you guys. So just wait for it and be excited about it. So through all that, what you told me is, okay, like all this crazy stuff happened in my life, and the identity that you took on, especially being in that small town and being labeled as a part of, like, all you could perceive was, well, everybody sees my dad this way, like you said, we're lumped into that, so everybody sees us this way, and I'm the daughter of a monster, is the identity that you took on. Yeah. And, which, I mean, like, yeah, right? And then, very clearly, very plainly, one day, God helped you adjust your identity, and he said, you're not the daughter of a monster, you're the daughter of a king. Absolutely. So tell me that story. Like, tell me when that happened, how that happened, like, what did that conversation go like? What else did he say to you that day? Or,
Well, it was really cool. So, in about 2010, I had, prior to that, been a worship leader at a church, very heavily involved in this church. And then the church imploded and it disbanded. And as a result, I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt like my whole identity had just been totally ripped from me. And I thought, God, I was following you. I was doing everything you said to do. And now I no longer have this. Like, who does that make me?
Now what?
Yeah.
No, there you go. So what it did for me was it took away the identity that I thought was like my good Christian identity.
Right. Yep.
And I didn't know what to do with myself. Like I literally was like, God, I don't like you. I don't want anything to do with you. If you can give me this and then take it away from me when I was following you, I don't want anything to do with you. And I spiraled into a heavy depression.
Sure.
Now, what a lot of people didn't know up until that point is for the entirety of my adult life, I'd always struggled with suicidal thoughts. So I was constantly thinking, I'm not worthy to be alive. If people really knew the real me, they wouldn't like me. Feeling like an imposter in my life, and just always feeling like I should be dead. So I struggled with suicidal thoughts all the time. So coming into this trauma, this imploding of this church, it totally wrecked me. And I remember spiraling so hard and feeling like I was going to hurt myself. I sat one time with my husband in the car and said, I think you need to take me to a hospital. Wow. You need to commit me, because if you don't, I'm going to hurt myself.
Right.
And my husband was so gentle with me, and he said, let's get through tonight and let's get you some counseling. How about let's try to pursue some counseling. Sure. Not that he wouldn't have taken me to the hospital, but he was like, let's try to get you some counseling, get you some help, and let's get through this night. So he stayed with me, and I ended up finding a really great counselor. And one of the things the counselor said to me was that I was really struggling with my value and my worth and my identity, and I didn't even realize that's what I was struggling with so much. Right. So in the course of going through this, God met me and revealed to me that it really was, for me, a struggle about my identity and who I was. Right. And he said, you're not Jim Bryant's daughter. You're not the daughter of a rapist or a monster. You're my daughter. You're my princess. You're the daughter of a king. Right. And you need to relearn what it is to be my daughter and what that means. And I was like, I had been following Christ forever, a long time. I'd been a worship leader. I'd been, in my church. I'd been doing all the right things.
All the right things, right.
And absolutely had never let God into that part of my life. And it took something that looked like it was like this profound tragedy. And it felt like a profound tragedy. But I liken those moments and what happened in 2010 to like Joseph being thrown into the pit and how God used that.
The lions.
You know, no, Joseph.
Oh, Joseph.
Being
Just
sold,
kidding.
no,
Not
Right.
Daniel. Where he was sold into slavery. Got it.
Yeah.
We're on the same page.
but the same sort of thing. I mean, in that, like, what looks like a really horrible thing
Yeah.
ended up being a really good
Right,
thing.
absolutely.
You know, like Joseph said at the end of his life, once he finally realized what it was,
Right.
you know, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And
absolutely.
so the enemy meant to destroy me,
Right.
but God meant that for good. That
Right.
was he had to let everything just be pulled out from underneath me.
Yeah.
For me to be able to get free of suicidal thoughts, of a false identity, a lack of hope, to bring me to where I am now.
Right. Well, and I had never heard that, like, I had heard that part of your story. I had never heard you say the thing about, and it was so clear to me just then, it sounds like you've already had this revelation, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but like, you had just covered up, you were just running from that identity of who you were with your dad, and had just covered that up with the church stuff. Like that was never, like, you had never gotten to that base level of God, who am I, and help clean all this up, right?
Right.
And so you just covered that up. Yeah, that was so profound to me when you said that. Like, I had then built my identity in, I'm the worship leader at a church, and da-da-da. Man, that's crazy. That's amazing.
It's all about proof.
Right. And I talk about that. I talk about that in whatever chapter of my book. But I talk about how, he's 10 or 11, how that's what so many people do when they go through trauma, or what I call now what moment, or whatever in your life. The majority of people never really deal. Right? They never deal and dig into and figure out, like, what's really going on. They just run. They run. They go to put their life, you know, back together, move on, ignore it, cover it up, like, just power through, be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without ever really dealing with, like, okay, what was really the fallout of this in my life? Like, how did this affect my core identity? Like, how is this shaking who I think I am, and how I'm making decisions, and my, you know, my paradigm of the world now. And so, yeah, dude,
well, if church and Jesus is the answer, right? You know, sometimes, but not necessarily all the people that work for the church are equipped to deal with this type of thing too, right? And even back, I think we were talking earlier about, you know, folks back in the church years ago. I think we're starting to talk about things in a little more real way today, but some of that was taboo, right?
For sure.
You know, suicide. You know, if you committed suicide, you go to hell or something. You know what I mean? It was kind of this. So we didn't really talk about that. Other things, you know, sexual abuse, abuse of my own. You know, through my my parents and whatnot when I was a kid. You know, that was tough to talk about. So you know, it wasn't something. So you hid in that identity. But then we're also told, well, go to church. Jesus is the answer. So we go, get involved, we get busy, right? But we're not necessarily, you know, dealing with our problems.
Absolutely.
But, you know, being at church, we do get to work. Yeah. So it comes around. I think it's a good place to start.
It does. Well, and then another thing that I felt like a lot of people were saying in that whole thing of being churchy is there's a verse that says to press forward and not look back. And I feel like it's been totally used the wrong way. Well, and it's been used in the wrong way because one of the things about being able to go forward is you have to be able to look back in a very, like, transparent, like, this really happened, this is how I really felt. My big epiphany happened for me in my counseling when I gave myself permission to feel anger at my dad. Because I never...
I hadn't done that yet. Dang.
Well, I felt it. I didn't give myself permission to it. I felt a lot of shame for it.
Right. It's okay to be mad about that,
Yeah. But I didn't think that I could. I thought, I've just got to push that down and I've got to forgive. Like, God just says forgive, and I'm not really feeling that back there. And it was like, it's like this animal crawling up my back saying, hey, guess what? I'm still here.
So how did you deal with the past without necessarily living it? I mean, a lot of times that's, you know, I feel myself, it's like I'm in the past. I'm not, you know, I'm still I have all those feelings, you know, it's almost like I'm still there as opposed to, is that the redemption part of it? Is there, you know, how did you work through that?
I wish I could say that, I didn't have to go back into it because I kind of did. I mean, what I had to do was, one, I had to give myself permission again to feel what I felt. to be completely honest with God about it too. That was another thing, is like, oh, I can't really tell God I'm feeling all this stuff. And I'd be like, hey God, how you doing? Everything's good here. And it'd be
like he doesn't know, right? We're so silly.
We are. We think
I'm not sure who we're fooling, if it's everybody else or God too. Yeah.
Well, we put God in very human terms, and He's just not human. His ways are perfect, and He's so above us. But we don't realize that. We try to categorize Him that way. But I had to be super real. And another thing I had to do was I had to trust someone with my secrets, because secrets are power. And for me, there were lots of secrets. There were lots of family secrets. There was lots of there was a lot of shame around what my dad did, and knowing what he did to that he wasn't convicted of. So it was being able to like put out all those secrets in a place and with someone I could really trust. Like, you don't want to tell your secrets just to anybody.
Right, for sure. That's real life.
That's one of the things I've talked about with people.
That's
like,
valuable.
Well, they think, oh, well, I'll just find somebody to tell my secrets. It's like, no, you need to find somebody trustworthy. But definitely being able to tell your secrets disarms them, and it takes away their power and their control over you. And that's a start. And then so I wished I had like more of a magic bullet. But I think God can meet you in those things of being vulnerable, being real, telling someone your secrets, telling them about things that you've never told anybody, and working those through. And then it's different for everybody, but for me, that was a big thing.
And there's that word, vulnerability.
I know, so that's such a good jumping off point. I know, it's the heebie-jeebies about it. So let me just, where do I even start? If you have not heard of Brené Brown, I need you to go Google Brené Brown as soon as this video is over, and go watch her TED Talks. Brené Brown is the world's foremost authority on shame and vulnerability. She is, it's so amazing, her entire field of work and research and her perspective and just the way she communicates, it's amazing. She's very, very scientific. But what she studies is she started studying human connection, how we all have that need, and then through that research found out, okay, what severs connection? The biggest thing is shame. And then, okay, how do we overcome shame to kind of reignite connection? And the answer that she found was vulnerability. And that word also gave her the heebie-jeebies, and she tried to run from it. She tried to find a workaround, find another answer for how do we overcome shame. And 6 years later, after doing all that research, she still found out vulnerability was the answer. And so, yes, she has written several books. Like I said, go watch the TED Talks. I'll put links of them in here.
She's really good.
After we're done, I'll put them in the comments and on the event page. But her books, this is the first one I picked up by Brené Brown. It's called I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Isn't. Like, I saw that title and I was like, oh, that's for sure, right? Like, that's exactly what I'm thinking. And then she has The Gifts of Imperfection. Her newest book is Braving the Wilderness. She also has Daring Greatly and Rising Strong. So she's absolutely phenomenal. But again, she talks about shame and how just shame affects every part of our lives, disconnects us from people, from community, which is what we need, and then how to overcome that is through vulnerability. But I was re-listening to her TED Talks today. I was actually outside in the backyard with my husband. We were playing cornhole. For anybody not from Ohio or the Midwest, you might not know what that is. It's a game with boards and beanbags. Don't worry about it. Anyway, and I was Google that too. So maybe don't Google it. I don't know what those results are going to come up as.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
It's a game.
Yeah, never mind.
So anyway, she says this quote. I literally drop my beanbags, walk away from the game. Barry's like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "I have to write that down." So what she said is that empathy is the antidote to shame. And empathy, so let's think about empathy in this context really quickly. So when you're able to be vulnerable, then that gives you empathy for yourself. It then allows you to have empathy for other people. It's basically just admitting, let's all be vulnerable and admit all at once that none of us are perfect. We're all imperfect. We're all struggling. And so then we can all have empathy for one another. So she says empathy is the antidote to shame. And she said, if you put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 things to survive: secrecy, silence, and judgment. if you put that same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it literally can't survive. And so that's really the answer to all that. So you were able to find vulnerability and empathy and all those things through counseling, which is amazing. I definitely recommend that. Oh, and that's a good point. So we forgot to make our disclaimer because I forgot to put it on my type sheet. So we have a big red, highlight this, circle it, stars next to it, disclaimer that none of us sitting here are licensed psychiatrists, psychologists, professionals. We're not medical doctors. We're nothing. We're just here having.
Well, we are something, but we're not those.
Not sorry. So we're not professionals in this realm. We're just here sharing our stories because again, we want this conversation to be open. We want you guys to feel empowered to be able to be open and vulnerable and have these conversations. And so, yes, if you are dealing with depression, anxiety, if you're dealing with suicidal thoughts, if you're in that place where you're really seriously struggling with this, please seek professional attention. Like, get help. There are suicide prevention lines. You can get into counseling, you can get into therapy. Mm-hmm. The first time that I started going to therapy, like, first of all, that's like a big scary thing, right? Especially again, when you grow up in that environment where it's not okay to admit that there's something wrong with you. Like, therapy in and of itself is like this big taboo thing. And so when I finally decide that I need therapy, I'm like, where do you even go? Like, I'm not about to go ask other people and like let them know that I'm about to go to therapy. So I just like Googled local therapists. And here's a really great resource. If you have a church that you go to locally, reach out to them. They can probably recommend some therapists in your area, some psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever you need in your area that can help you. I know if you're local to Cincinnati, you can get on the Crossroads website. They literally have a tab. You can download, you can look. They have lists of different types of therapists for like every season of life, every type of therapy, marriage therapy, post-marital therapy, whatever, childhood trauma, all those things. You can find a therapist near you that focuses on what you want. Yeah. But please, get help, reach out. That's nothing to be ashamed of either. And if you're feeling that shame and that guilt and that tug to not do that, that's probably exactly when you need to do it the most, right? Like, right. So understand, like, if that's what you're feeling. In all honesty, I believe that that's the enemy trying to hold you back because he's trying to isolate you. He's trying to keep you away from something that's going to help you and help you move forward. So push through that, get help. So that's my disclaimer.
So back to vulnerability for a second. Can we go back there?
Yes.
Because is it just me or does anybody else like hate the feeling of vulnerability? Right? You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes it's freeing, I guess, but it's, to me, not a very good feeling until later. You know what I mean? It's almost like working out. They're ready to go, and then afterwards feel better. I mean, how did you deal with vulnerability?
Sure.
Or did
just probably like like everybody else. I mean, there are moments where you can be vulnerable with somebody, though. I mean, you can have one or two outcomes, and it can be a good outcome, which the majority of the time, if you're vulnerable, you have a great outcome. But there are moments where some people are not going to receive it. So it's really being careful on where you're vulnerable. Right. But the thing is, you need to be vulnerable or you're not going to connect with people. Mm-hmm. You're just not. Yeah. I mean, that vulnerability creates connections with people unlike anything else. Right. It's when you can say, here's my heart, show me yours. Right. And we can live together in that space. Mm-hmm. I mean.
And it feels like I should be doing that more and more in all parts of life, not just the parts that I'm hurting in or, need some help in or whatever, but just being, I don't know, a little more, if I'm dating or, what I mean, whatever. Right. And I'm not very good at it. Like, I guess, so I just wanted to say, like, there's probably people out there, I don't like it. Right. Is it okay not to like it?
No, it absolutely is. And Brene says that too in one of the video clips I was watching today. She was like, when I found out vulnerability was the answer, I tried to run from it. And she goes, so, those people who, like, when they find out that vulnerability is the answer, then they like walk into it and they move towards that space. She goes, yeah, I'm not one of those people. I don't even hang out with those people. Like, that's how much she hated it. Like, she was trying to find a different answer, right? Yeah. And for me, like, I know when I started being vulnerable and sharing my story, because, I dealt with going through my divorce and again, that all feeling taboo, and I was kind of doing my own therapy. Like, my own therapy, yes, I did go to counseling. Again, that's a very private thing. It can be, which it was for me. at the time. And then I was reading a lot of books to help me, as if, big shocker there, I know, for you guys that know me. So I was reading a lot of books to help me kind of self-navigate, like almost, like books really did become my therapist. And so again, that's very private, that people don't have to know. And it was when I started, so for me, thankfully, it was kind of after I was already on the other side of like seeing the things that I needed to deal with and kind of wrestling with those and getting some healing, getting some freedom. And when I started sharing my story very vulnerably about what I had gone through and what I was still dealing with, that's when I saw how incredible vulnerability was and how it opened up doors. Because I would sit down across from somebody and I would tell them about all my mess, like all of it. Like I just like, blah, 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 like it all comes out. And people would sit there and be like, that's exactly what I needed to hear. I feel the exact same way. Oh my gosh, you just gave me so much freedom in that. And so then for me, it almost became like a drug at that point. Like it was very, very addictive that like, oh my goodness, like this is so, like seeing that click in other people's eyes and seeing how that gives them, because then it gives other people permission to not feel alone. Right? Because that's exact, shame just drives you into isolation. It makes you feel like I'm the only person going through this. I'm the only person thinking things like this. I'm the only person dealing with things like this. And if anybody else knew, then I would lose everyone. Those are the voices of shame. If you're hearing things like that, right? That's all. Yeah, that's all shame. Those are all lies. And the minute that you get vulnerable, it gives other people permission to be vulnerable. It gives other people permission to feel not alone. And to say me too, right? That's a big, term floating around in culture. It's a bit hot button right now. Hashtag me too, but it's so true that gives other people freedom.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we want to hear her story about her suicide, right? Or the attempt, or and ask you to be vulnerable with telling, because you told us about it earlier, and it's like.
Well, that was my plan.
Well, we heard about your adult plan, but you actually did try to commit suicide at 16.
I did.
Okay.
So it was right in the midst of my dad was really out of control from the time I was about 14 till he actually got arrested. And he was having a lot of parties at our house. That's how he got a lot of victims in. And these were friends that I had. And so I was starting to spiral it from about 14, 15 years of age into a depression even then.
Sure.
And so I was drinking a lot. So the night of my 16th birthday party, well, not party, sorry, no party. The night of my 16th birthday, when most people would have parties and like celebrations, mine was, we went to a bootlegger, got some alcohol, and the only thing I remember that I wanted to do is I just didn't want to live anymore.
Sure.
I was way depressed. I couldn't tell anybody about what was going on at the house.
Right.
That was prior to his arrest, so no one knew.
Right.
And I got really, really super drunk. And a friend of mine had told my brother, said, I'll try to like sober her up. I'll take her out. And so we're driving down a major highway. And I remember thinking, if I just open the door and I jump out, I'll be dead. And it'll all be over.
Right.
And I remember thinking, it'll be over.
Right.
That's all I wanted. So I open the door and I get about halfway out. My friend grabs a hold of the back of my shirt and he's struggling with the car, trying to hold on to me. And I remember I started fighting him because he was keeping me from what I felt like was
the answer. Right.
I was gonna. It was gonna be over.
Right.
So he pulls me back into the car. He gets it over to the side of the road, and he starts screaming at me. What are you thinking?
Right.
What are you doing?
Right.
And I was like, why did you stop me? I just remember feeling so disappointed that he stopped me from actually just taking my life.
Right.
And so that carried on with me because I kept thinking after that like big epiphany, like if I just kill myself, it'll be over and all of my struggles will be done.
Right.
And so for the entirety of my adult life, I carried that in the back of my head, that suicide and death would be the ultimate end of all that pain.
Sure.
So that's how that happened on the night of my 16th birthday. Like everybody else is marked with like a car, big party, let's celebrate. Mine was with a suicide attempt, trying to jump out of a moving car, going down the highway. On 75.
That's a tough age, 16, and kind of dealing with that, and then taking that kind of into adulthood, right? I mean, so I don't even, I know a little bit, but
it's funny, so through my adulthood, so I came to know Christ when I was 17, and my response to getting to converting, to becoming a believer, was somebody had said to me, well, God loves you. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking, wow, the God of the universe really loves me? Broken daughter of the monster loves me. It was never about hell, because I felt like I lived in hell. So my response was all about the love. And I just was so overwhelmed with gratefulness that God wanted to love me. And so I just ran headlong into that. But I was always dealing with this thought in the back of my head constantly of when things got a little bit hard, or not even a little bit, anytime it was hard, of I could just kill myself. If I could just go in there and take those pills, if I could just figure out how to hang myself, a million ways I would think of wanting to die. And I remember there were plenty of mornings when I would get up and I would look at myself in the mirror and I'd think, today would be a good day to die. If it was just over today. It didn't matter what good was going on, what bad was going on. I was always constantly thinking of that. And I was a believer. So I felt like an orphan in the house of God.
Well, and we talked about that too, how much shame there is around, and this is around the topic of mental health and depression and suicide, but even, for so many other things, that it's really easy to have those thoughts of, well, as a believer, as a Christian, I should know better.
Right.
If I had enough faith, I wouldn't feel this way. I wouldn't. If I was a better Christian, and so then that just loads even more shame onto you, right? That I shouldn't be dealing with this because I'm a Christian, and so that makes you want to hide that even more, right? Because you're not a good enough Christian. You're not doing that well enough. There's
especially
so many...
if you're having some success in that world. You said you were working in the church and things like that, and I've worked in it a little bit too, and started a ministry and whatnot. And you get a little peek behind the curtain, and maybe it doesn't quite run as good as the Saturday and Sunday show. Say it looks like, know what I mean. So it gets to be a little weird, maybe. You know what I mean, to be in that life and then not and be so broken, because you may be working with people. I could talk the talk a lot of times, you know what I mean, but I was still kind of ailing and hurting, and so it all kind of came crumbling down for me. How did you deal with it?
Well, and you feel like a hypocrite, we talked about that. You feel like a hypocrite, right?
Well, I mean, you look at other believers and they look like they've got it all together, especially in that environment, and you're like, I'm eventually gonna get there, maybe. What's the secret? And you feel like even more of a failure, when you're in that. When you see other believers who look like they have it together, they don't ever talk about these. They're never depressed,
and I don't really want to talk until it's over, right? And then I've accomplished. I've come through. I've been redeemed, and this is supposed to feel great, right? You know what I mean? And Jesus has me, and so am I not faithful enough, again, like we're saying? Am I not loving him enough when I'm doing this wrong? I mean, why does vulnerability suck for me? You know what I mean? Or love, you know what I mean? And all that kind of stuff.
Why am I struggling so hard and they're not?
Yeah.
And the thing is everybody is struggling.
And maybe they are, right? They're also,
it's, it's out here. They have it here. And I think where we need to get as a church, and we're getting there, is where we need to pull those parts away and just be the real us and say, if you struggle with depression, if you struggle with, whatever it is, addictions or whatever, to be able to be real and vulnerable and get to the place where we let Jesus into those places, because that's where he wants to be. He doesn't want to be at the surface part right here. He wants to be right in here. And it's just being willing to be able to let him into those spots, and as a church, giving permission to people when they're struggling to say that they're struggling, to say it's okay not to be okay. And give voice to that and give conversation to that. That's why I feel really strongly about talking about my struggles, because I'm in a much better place now, but it took a long time trying to navigate that. And why don't I look like the guy over here in my church who just seems like he's got it all figured out, and I'm over here like feeling like I'm treading water and I'm going to go off myself tomorrow. You know, it just it was that bad.
Right. Well, and I love when we were talking earlier, JD was like, well, when do you feel like you've made it? When do you feel like you've gotten through and you're on the other side and all the things? And I loved your analogy that you talked about the onion.
That our struggle and our pain and our experiences it's like an onion, and God will peel back one layer and there's still another layer and another layer. Right. But the thing is like he walks us through that of dealing with that. And for me, I was an onion, but I had that hard shell on the outside. And it took him to get through that first, the entirety of my adult life. I'm really sad that I missed so much good with God because I was stuck in that spot for him to start peeling that away. So it's really not an arrival, because I think God he'll peel back one layer that we can deal with, and then there's something else, and he's constantly perfecting us, but he never gives up on us. So that's the cool thing about it. Like he'll continue to work on that onion.
Right. Yeah. So I have two thoughts about that. So first of all, which order do I want to say these in? So let me go ahead and make this point first. So to Jen's point about looking around inside the church and everybody wearing masks and you perceive everyone else as perfect, but then really everybody else has problems too. Did it die for real? No, there we go. So if you're not within the church, that happens so much on social media, right? Like we look around on Instagram and everybody's got their perfect filters and everybody else looks like all their lives are tied up with little bows and everything's great. Well, the reality is, and you see these memes floating around, you never know what struggle somebody's walking through, so be nice to everybody. Well, that's true, right? Like we all have junk in our lives. Some people are just better at putting a pretty package on it than others, right? But everybody's dealing with something. And again, that is the way that the lies in our minds work, is that, oh, you're the only person dealing with this. Because as soon as I believe that it's the enemy, I believe that it's Satan, that it's the devil, whatever you want to call him, but you can believe it's whatever you want. But the point is that the minute that he can get you isolated, then he can whisper those lies to you. And there's nobody and nothing to refute them, and so you're more vulnerable to believe them at that point. The other thing I'm going to mention that I wanted to bring up is, so like with you and JD, I want to give you. It's already close to an hour. I know. It's ridiculous because I have so many more questions for you. But I wanted to touch on the point that you had. So we started this conversation. I was like, okay, JD. So like, have you ever had experience with depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts and because I know you had kind of a rough childhood too, and your response was like, oh dang, like, I haven't even thought about my childhood yet. And like after he heard Jen's story, he's like, oh, there's all these things I have to go back and like think about. So he's got some deep onion stuff to get into. But where he's at right now is around your illness that we have talked about. Correct.
So it's not like I haven't gone to counseling for the childhood stuff. Sure. It's just that I really haven't got the story into any type of bow that it'd be too messy to try to tell. Sure. But with dealing with the lung disease, and I know I don't necessarily look sick and whatever, but I've got a terrible lung disease that I really thought by now I'd be on a transplant list, and recently just found out kind of exactly how the transplant list works. That the sickest people are the ones that are going to get transplanted. So I'm starting to understand that I'm going to have to get really, really sick. And I'm sick now. I have terrible days where I sleep a lot and whatever. And I have okay days. I still try to play some tennis. Can't do it as well as I used to. But, they want me to exercise and I strap my tank to me. I do the best I can. But anyway, so I went, in May was my last appointment. And I'm like, hey, look, I'm ready. Right. You know what I mean? So can we, because I've been waiting for this life event to take place, major life event to take place for a couple of years. And, so I kind of like to get my life back. Right. You know what I mean? See if I can. And then they were like, well, look, you're just, works. And then, so they explained it to me. And I get it. It's like, I guess I've always gotten it, but, it kind of hit me in a different way this time. Yeah. And I used to think that I had something to say about it too. So, when I left the office after kind of finding out, and look, I don't want to take lungs from people that need it worse than me. So it's not, but at the same token, I really did think like I was going to have a say in like, hey, I'm really feeling bad. Can we get on with this? And the answer is no. So I was mad for like 6 weeks, and really even from the time that we were here talking last time about our topic, and then this time, and I got really sick in between about 3-4 weeks. I had a cold that dropped in, and and we worry about that with me because of bronchitis and everything else. But you want to talk about not being able to have empathy. I was so sick that I really couldn't think of anybody else but myself. You know what I mean? It was like, it was hard to, So, I was depressed.
Yeah. Well, and you said you got to the point where you're like, gosh, if this is how sick I'm gonna have to be, then like, what's the point?
So
let's just be done with it now.
Correct. Like, so is that suicide too? And is letting go. So before 1985, if you got the disease I have, you died.
Right.
Then they started doing lung transplants. So my question that I've been asking for the last couple of years is look, and being as sick as I just got, brought it up again. Right. Maybe I don't want to go through. Right. You know what I mean? Like I felt so bad. I was like, I don't know. But so is it now, since mid 1985? Is it suicide to not go through the transplant because it's available? Right. And the best answer that I got from friends of mine, the Rosinskis, said it was a difference between being active and passive. So don't take pills or do something to end your life. But if you were to say, look, I'm not going to go through the chemo anymore, or in my case, I'm not going to do the transplant or whatever, then that wouldn't be. I mean, I'm interested in anybody's thought on that or whatever, but that was kind of, so I've never really thought about necessarily taking my own life. I can't really say that, like I might have had oh my God, I'd rather be dead, but it was nothing, I think, as serious as you were dealing with, Jen. But with my illness, I deal with death, and I know anybody could die, we have those conversations all the time. I get hit by a truck on the way home and that kind of thing. But death is in my life, right? I have to kind of deal with that. And so, I think a lot about it, and I have to deal with it.
Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to point out was, there can be all sorts of circumstances that kind of get you to this place where you're dealing with, anxiety, depression, basically hopelessness, right? And so, my story, there's a difference between things that you do to yourself, like circumstances you bring into your own life. That was my situation. Things that have been done to you, right? Like that's, and things that happen to you. And then versus just things that you've seen or experienced. Like I think about like guys in the military, right? Like they didn't do anything, nothing was really done to them. They just were exposed to these things that then challenge them, make them want to isolate, make them deal with depression, anxiety, and those type of things. So everybody's story can kind of be different with this. So again, just understand, like it doesn't matter what you're going through or how you got to that place or whatever. Like you are really not alone. You're really not alone, and it's okay to talk about. Find somebody that you can talk about with it. So I just wanted to point that out real quick. But I did have some questions from Jen, and we might go over. You guys are still with us. If you have to go, I understand. But I want to ask you. So, what would you say to someone? And I think you kind of dove into this a little bit, but maybe just kind of quick hitter. What would you say to someone that's feeling depressed and helpless currently?
First, you're not alone.
Yep.
Absolutely not alone. And a lot of people have dealt with this. They need to talk about it more, obviously, sure. Which is why I'm here. But if you're struggling with depression or you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, obviously, find someone to talk to first and foremost. It can be a counselor, it can be a really close friend, but talk to someone and get some help first and foremost. And then also let yourself off the hook. One of the things that was really bad for me was I would think, God, if I could just be a better Christian, if I just believed more, if I had more faith, I wouldn't be depressed. And that is so not the case. I mean, there are lots of factors. I'm glad you were talking about, like, lots of things work into how depression can sneak into your life. It can be situational. It can be chemical.
Sure.
There's lots of things that can happen to take you to that place. But let yourself off the hook and quit kicking yourself if you're struggling with depression. Like, that's oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I've had 2 friends in the last year who lost their parents recently, and both of them very high functioning professionals. Both of them kind of came to me expressing how much they were struggling just to, like, get out of bed and do things and whatever, and they kept apologizing to me. Like, I'm sorry I haven't gotten that done for you yet. I'm sorry I didn't get back to you. I'm sorry. And to both of them, I'm like, dude, like, you're dealing with stuff. Like, you don't need to apologize to me anymore. Like, take your time. Take a deep breath. It's totally fine. Now, maybe not everybody in your life is going to have that level of empathy for you, but, like, for the love of God, have it for yourself. Yeah. Like, you are allowed to not be okay. Like, it's okay to not be okay. Like, it is okay to need time, to need space, to process, to deal with things. Just to deal. So
that is hard.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So I know when I felt that, really, the only thing that's really gotten me out of it is I've had to talk with somebody.
Yeah,
I gotta get it out. You know, because when I was sick, so moving around would wear me out. I'd go down for a day or something. Then I was like, well, look, stay down. Take antibiotics, everything and whatever. And I wasn't getting. Then I was alone for 5 days. I'm not necessarily reaching out. So I'm not the best at reaching out and just making a phone call for an hour or something like that. I always say I'll do it or whatever, and then I don't. So we have to be more vigilant I do. To stay out of it, because I can go there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Next question. Sure. What do you feel is the biggest stigma to people asking for help?
There's the biggest stigma. There's a lot of them. I think people feel like if they admit they have an issue, that somehow makes them less than. That they're like way broken, or they're not good enough, or they're not Christian enough, or they don't have enough faith.
It's marked and it's permanent.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. So people will look at a million things and think, if I ask for help, that's going to make a pronouncement on me, and if I get the pronouncement of depression or whatever, that's that's all people will ever see is that, and that's a lie from Satan to keep you from asking for help.
Don't want the vulnerability. Got to take the mask off. I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm reminded of one thing too.
Something.
Sorry.
No, you keep talking.
I was just reminded of one of my favorite stories in the Bible is of Elijah. And Elijah, of all the characters in the Bible, all the men in the Bible, he suffered with depression. And so when he got super, super depressed, he ran away and he hid in a cave. Like, he was like to the point of he just despised of death. Yeah. And, a lot of people look at this verse and they go, oh, this is how God reveals how he talks to us in that still small voice. And I was like, but if you look at the situation, Elijah was depressed. And he was expecting God to be in the roar and in the reprimand and all of the things that people expect when they're depressed, right? They expect people to tell them.
Oh, that's my air tank.
Oh, I was like, I have no idea what that's.
Sorry, we're hearing a noise.
Oxygen filling up the room. Hang on,
If we get slap happy.
I was like, what is that? So anyway,
Elijah.
So with Elijah, he was expecting God to show up in the angry storm.
Yeah.
And it says God wasn't there, and he expected him to come another way, and God wasn't there. And so how did God talk to depressed Elijah? He talked to him in a gentle, small voice to woo him back. When Elijah could finally hear him, after he had slept, and after he had ate, and after he had kind of just waited there. And so I would just encourage you, if you're feeling like God is like going to be somehow disappointed in your depression or whatever, that just think about Elijah and his God meeting him in that cave and talking to him with gentleness and softness. That to me is the meaning of that story.
Yeah,
I know that's just my opinion of it, but everybody's like, oh yeah, that's just how God talks to us. It's like, there's Elijah was depressed,
something else there.
You know, he was expecting a storm and he didn't get it from God. He got kindness. So anyway,
what is the best thing you can do as a friend to someone dealing with depression or suicide? How do you be a good friend? Like, what do they need? Like, how?
First and foremost, no judgment. Zero judgment. If somebody comes to you and says, I'm struggling with this, you have to resist the urge to first give advice. And not at first. Let them talk. Let them express where they are. And no matter what they say, just let them be okay with expressing where they are, no matter how ugly it might come out or how dark, how is uneloquent a word, you know, like just however it is, but let them express wherever they are, because one of the things that makes it hard for someone to talk about when they're depressed is when they're immediately getting advice back. You know, like, oh, well, you just need to do this. Right. Well, if you only did this, you'd be better. Or you need to do this.
On that. I feel like I need to work on that. Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you have to, I think, actively listen and think, I'm not going to offer you advice. I'm going to listen to you, because one of the things that you, when you're depressed, that you feel like you don't have, because you're always isolating, is you don't have someone listening to you. So sometimes just being able to verbalize everything,
for sure,
even if it's shocking, is probably the best. And then just waiting until there is a good time to be able to offer, like, hey, if you want to get counseling, I'll go with you. Or, you know, helping them get some connection to some help is absolutely the best. But the first and the foremost is being a good listener before you offer advice.
Well, and you even said, we were talking earlier, you even said, like a reaction that made you cringe with people is when they did the head tilt and they gave you pity.
The pity,
like even that wasn't productive, and you're like, no, that's not what I, you know what I mean, like, so that's really interesting.
And you wind up consoling them,
right.
So guys, sorry, you know, I know my illness is really making you uneasy. So stuff, you know,
let me apologize for being sick, because I can tell you're not.
It is. You're going through something here.
Right.
Or
same exact
I get the positive. Be positive. You know, you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be great.
Right.
That's right. So,
I also am
I get the
guilty of
positive
that.
thing. By the way, I understand that we got to kind of, you know, that helps. But you know,
dude,
but it's like listening to somebody else that's not sick tell you, hey, be positive with what you're going through. It's almost like, okay, you know what I mean? I just, you know.
Yeah. It doesn't really help where you are. It doesn't heal anything about your illness, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the point, is that it's meeting people where they are, right? Like it's getting like I pick the way that I visualize it in my mind. Okay, like let me get down and sit cross-legged on the floor with you. Like let me get down there where you are and just sit and be with you.
Yeah.
And just be there. Just be there.
That's absolutely the best right there. I mean, absolutely. I think if I'd had my moments, and you can maybe speak to it even with your illness, if I had moments in my depression when I was at my worst, if I knew someone was just going to sit with me and be with me and not give me any judgment and not necessarily give me any advice on things they thought I should do, like, you know, like, maybe you should go do this or this. If they just sat with me in some of the worst feelings that I was having in my life, that would have done so much. That would have done so much.
I mean, I've got some good friends now that really kind of know, like if I'm talking about the illness or whatever, they might say something like, well, I really don't know what to say to them. You know what I mean? You know, and I get that they don't know what to say. Like I'm talking to them about something that they can't really, you know, personally feel, you know what I mean? You can empathize again, sympathize, you know, with what, you know, other people are going through, but you can't always just put yourself in that position and feel what they're feeling. So I get it, you know what I mean? And I would imagine it's the same with, you know, suicide or something like that. We can't try to pretend like we know what they're feeling, you know.
Well, and I will say just one little caveat to that. If you have a friend who's telling you that, like, they're in imminent danger of suicide, that puts it in a new level, and obviously you want to get them help. But I'm just talking about, like, if they're struggling with thoughts or they're like depression. So I just want to put that caveat on there. If you have someone who's like,
depression,
forcibly
suicide,
take them to the hospital. Right.
Or call for help. Like if you know they're gonna like they're gonna hurt themselves right in that moment.
Right.
That's a little different. That's a new level. Yeah. But the majority of people just want to be heard. They want to be seen. Right. They want to know that someone is validating what they're feeling.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We all need that, right? So I have one last question, and this may be a little bit of a reiteration, so if it is, we can just skip it. But if you could go back and talk to yourself at 15, 16, whatever, have you thought about, or is that something, like, could you think of that real quick? Like, what is there something that you would say to yourself at that age?
I would say, this does not have to define you. Because I carried the definition of being the rapist's daughter, the monster's daughter, all through my adult life. And it took, within the last 10 years that God really started saying, let me tell you who you really are. Yeah. And I think it's what he wants to say to everybody. Let me tell you who you really are. Yeah. And so if I could talk to my 15, 16-year-old self, I would just say, do not let this define you. Do not carry this identity with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And I think that's a good caveat to kind of the wrap up that I wanted to have is that, okay, so this does not define you. Don't carry this with you. This is a moment. This is a piece of your story. This is a page of your story. It's not going to be your whole story. Mm-hmm. This isn't going to be forever. Right. So like, don't let, as bad as a moment is, as bad as a season is, as bad as something in your life is, if you can somehow keep it into perspective that this isn't going to be forever. There's a quote that I'm trying to think of, like, I'll get back to you on that. It's really good. But anyway, and we talked about that. I don't remember if we already talked about it in the video. You did, because you're talking about Joseph. Like, what is meant for, the bad things that happen in your life, God can turn around and use for good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything.
Right. Literally anything.
He doesn't waste any experience. I'm here to tell you.
Any experience, any pain, anything. And so, to wrap up, so I made a big note for myself, like, okay, but what is the solution? Like, what are we giving people? Like, we can have this whole talk, we've been talking for an hour now about all these awful things and how we're all dealing with these things, and that in itself, this conversation could be a little bit depressing, like, wow, what's the answer? And like, there is no like pretty bow, like, here's the solution and everything's fine. But I wanted to wrap up at least with saying, and that was a great segue, that if you're in that place, that you're just dealing with these type of things, ultimately it all comes down to hopelessness, right? Like, that is the place that you get to, that you feel like there is no hope, that it's never going to be better, it's never going to be different, so what's the point? Mm-hmm. And when you can't see any light that it could ever be better or it could ever be different, then you get to that place where there's depression and there is, why don't I just end it? And so what I want you to hear, if you're in that place, is that, like I just talked about, like, it can get better, it will get better, this isn't going to be forever. Please keep that in perspective. I want to reiterate again, you are not alone. And like, again, like, we just wanted to have this conversation to be normalizing this conversation. Like, maybe there's some of you in here, like, I remember I was having dinner with my friend down in Nashville a few weeks ago, and we were talking about how funny it is, like, in different cultures, even in the U.S., like, just different types of cities around the country, more conservative cities, more progressive cities, whatever. Whereas, like, she sits around with her friends, and like, as they're having a conversation, like, every one of them is talking about like what they discussed with their therapist that week. Whereas, like, in the town that she grew up in, like, ain't nobody talking about going to therapy, like, ever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, how different that is. And I just want this to be, so maybe you're in that small town where nobody's going to therapy, nobody's talking about therapy, nobody's talking about how this is a normal thing, that this is, you know what I mean? Like, it's all good. Like, it's okay. Like, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say that out loud. It's okay to need help. If you've never talked to anybody else ever in your life, if you're struggling with anything like this, talk to me. Send me a Facebook message. We can talk about it. I'm not going to have all your answers, but I will listen to you. And if you need, I can recommend resources for you.
Well, people have, God will redeem us, right?
Yes, yes.
And Jen is, testimony to that.
Yes.
And even,
So,
yeah.
So the segue into is that, again, there's always hope. And Jen has actually started this. It's a YouTube video series, or you're also doing it on Facebook, or it's across several social media platforms.
I'm putting it everywhere I can.
Everywhere we can put it. It's called
it's important.
Conversations of Hope.
Conversations of Hope.
And she's telling all these different people. She's inviting different people on to tell their stories of being in this place of hopelessness and finding the opposite of that, like God redeeming their story in whatever way and sharing those experiences. And so tell people where they can find you, how they can connect with you. Do you have a mailing list? What do you do?
I do. So you can go to conversationsofhope.org, and that's my website, and you can find me there. You can find me out on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. I'm also on Facebook. But yeah, connect with me if you want to get on a mailing list with me. Let me know that as well, and I will definitely send those out. We have so far 3. I'm getting ready to release the 4th video.
Awesome.
And the next video is going to be really cool because it's about redemption of a parent. So I
Very
really
cool.
connected with this one in a lot of ways. But go out and watch the other videos. They're interview style. They average right now about 20 minutes, so they're a very quick watch.
It's my goal in life. She's better than me.
My goal is 12 minutes, but I can tell you I'm a talker, and it ends up being a lot longer. Sometimes it's really kind of tough when you have like a long conversation with somebody. It's like, okay, what do I cut out? What do I leave in?
Right.
This is all so good. I want them to see this. So, but
I
yeah.
like our hour, by the way.
Thank you.
I think we need an hour.
Listen
That's
to me.
It's
Whole
so
other
good.
conversation. So good. So awesome. So definitely connect with Jen. Her book is going to be coming out one day. I will keep you posted about it. I think I'm
And
the most
title's
excited
gonna
person.
be-
Yeah, we don't know what the title's going to be. I'm still voting for Daughter of a Monster because I think that's great marketing. We could definitely sell that book. So I appreciate you guys joining us tonight. Thank you for the people that commented. I'm sorry we didn't have time to interact during the video. I promise I'll go back through and reply to all your comments. If you need anything else from me, you know how to connect with me. I love you guys. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will be back next month. If you're not already on my mailing list, hop on my mailing list. I'm going to be sending out some dates. I've got some speaking engagements coming up this fall. Would love to see your faces there in person, in real life, not just over video. That's it.
That's
Anything
it.
else? Good. All right.
Thank you.
Have a
Good.
great night, everyone.
Nice job.
Talk to you. Talk to you soon. Bye. We're done. Nope.